All right, we are live on YouTube.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. It is Friday, April 25th, and we are continuing to talk about H181. So we're here today with some folks from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. I guess we'll go around and introduce ourselves, and then we'll turn it over to you for the record. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Michael Southwood, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Nashville 2.
Aaron Klebner, 13 Burlington.
Laura Spelling,
Right.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury.
Jack Locker, committee assistant.
All right, and in the room,
I'm Polly Major, I'm the policy director for VHCB.
Craig Peltier, Director of Asset Management and Project Design at VHCB.
great.
Hi, and for the record, Gus Seelig, I'm the Executive Director at the Housing and Conservation Board.
You guys, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm in here, I think, on H181.
Yep.
But I think Madam Chair, you also suggested we at least do a brief introduction of the board's work. And so my goals are to do that and also to discuss 181 and the overlap between our work and the jurisdiction of this committee.
Great.
And I know that I can already feel that it's a Friday afternoon. The windows are open. And there's a desire not to be here probably real late in the day, so I will try to be
The coats are off.
succinct.
The coats are off.
Yeah. Eyes go next. But briefly about the Housing and Conservation Board, we are a multi-purpose, multi-goal entity organized as a quasi-public entity. We're like VITA, VSAC, the Housing Finance Agency in terms of structure. The governor appoints most of our board. He has 3 ex officios on it. 4 members of our board were appointed by the legislature. And you, as a legislature, appropriate money to us that we invest in housing and conservation projects all over the state. And that means we're doing a lot of housing, and we are subject to the building and energy codes that are part of the discussion of H181. I've got a long personal history on energy issues. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, I was the weatherization director at what is now Capstone Community Action. And in our work at the Housing and Conservation Board, we've had a long relationship with the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. So long before Efficiency Vermont was invented, Blair Hamilton, one of their founders, helped us write our first energy policy in the early 90s. And I served on their board when Efficiency Vermont was invented and for a number of years thereafter. So the work of this committee and its jurisdiction is really personally important to me, but as I think you'll see in this presentation, it's important in terms of the multiple goals that you've given the Housing and Conservation Board in terms of trying to create affordable housing. And to begin the presentation, there's only, I think, 12 slides. So again, I'm not going to keep you here all afternoon. The building here is in South Hero. And I think, was it this year or last year? It won the Better Building by Design competition. And it is an elderly development. And what it did was, beyond providing housing in a beautiful location for the elders of the islands, it really cemented what was the creation of a village center. So this building is a 5-minute walk from the community health center. It's right near the fire department. Also a short walk. So they're beginning to be amenities as you come into South Hero that were not there before. And you'll find lots of our work in rural communities has that exactly that intent. And in our regular work in downtowns, always looking for walkable sites for people, getting them the ability to be out of your car. And you'll see that through the presentation. You'll see several other buildings that also won that same award in past years as we go through it. But briefly about our statutory purpose. As I said, we do housing, we do conservation of all types, and I'll show you the variety of the kinds of projects. But what the statute says specifically is that we don't do housing or conservation or historic preservation just because they're nice things for Vermont. We do it to promote economic vitality and quality of life. And for those of you who represent rural communities, This is Shaftesbury, Vermont, and I just want to take a minute to talk about how over 3 decades we used resources to help that small southern Vermont town. So the first big thing that I knew about in Shaftesbury was that Stanley Fuel was pulled out in the early 90s. And the community came to us and said, we've just lost our major employer. We'd like there to be a reason for people to stop in Shaftesbury. Could you help us? Because we want to turn Robert Frost, the world-famed poet's house, into a museum. And that we made a historic preservation grant to do just that. About a decade later, a group whose identity I don't really know other than their name, the Sage City Syndicates, asked us to do in over 3 years 2 conservation deals around that body of water you see there, to both to protect Lake Perrin and to create a recreation center. But they knew about our dual mission of housing and conservation, and so they held out 4 or 5 acres from the conservation easement. And a decade after that, about 2017, 3 communities came together. Shaftesbury changed its zoning so that you could build 23 units on a 3-acre site. The village of North Bennington, which is about a 5-minute walk from the recreation area and the housing that got built, extended their water system to the site. And then the town of Bennington extended its sewer line, and that's what made 23 homes possible. Shaftesbury is a choice community, so kids can walk to school in North Bennington. They can go to school in Shaftesbury. They have lots of choice, and the apartments are beautiful, and they're about a 3-minute walk to the recreation area. So that's a bit about how we don't do it all at once, but how people and communities use our programs over time. This is what we've been up to since the pandemic began in terms of our housing mission. And I'm not going to try to go through all the numbers on this slide. You'll have it and you can look at it. But I'll point out a few things. One is that we were in unusual times, and there was a lot of federal money, first from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and then from ARPA, and then because of state surpluses. So we used a little under $400 million, and our partners pulled together another $700 million to achieve the results you see of 5,000 households will be served by that funding through all the different touches on the housing needs spectrum that you see. So we began a program to help the farm community, farmers provide better housing for their farmers. If you have a senior or disabled constituent, we have for 30 years operated a program with the Center for Independent Living, and rather than going into a community care home, if somebody needs a bathroom modification or a ramp, there's a program for them. We responded to the opioid epidemic by working with a group called V4 and sometimes Turning Point. We've now opened 4 recovery residences across the state for people struggling to get sober. We've added to the shelter system, but the biggest investments have been in home ownership and rental housing. And that's a very, very quick summary about our work, but we're touching lots of buildings. We're building lots of new buildings, and we're rehabilitating lots of old buildings that need a lot of work and a lot of care. So we have a lot of experience, and I am not a tech guy. It's part of why Craig is here today. So if people want to go deep on technology, but for many years, our building standards have been high. We've won a MacArthur grant back about 2006. There was a nationwide competition, and it was for housing preservation work. And what we then contracted with DEIC, and a fellow named Andy Shapiro wrote for us what he called a roadmap for energy affordability. So you'll find, well, we're not, we have done passive house. You see it building in this slideshow. Our standards in terms of air sealing are certainly at that level. I think one of the issues that we want to discuss with you is just need for more equity in energy policy. We're thinking about equity because we're in the midst of, as you all know, and your constituents, I'm sure, talk to you, a housing crisis. And what we have seen over the last 5 years has been a tripling of homelessness in the state. If I go back to 2017, the cost of what we build in Vermont has just about doubled in cost. And the energy components of that have gone up as well. So we're in a very difficult cost environment, and it's part of the balance that I'm sure this committee hears about regularly. Who do we serve? Our statute lets us serve renters up to median income, homeowners up to 120% of median. Federal programs that we partner with sometimes have lower income restrictions than those you see posted here. But when you look at what I think of as the essential workforce, meaning you can't work remotely, you got to show up to deliver childcare, you've got to show up on the farm, you've got to show up to fix a car, you've got to show up to teach, drive a truck. All those occupations are folks that we are helping to house, and particularly with our home ownership and rental programs. One of the things in our statute that makes us unique, I think, is a requirement that the investments we make, we seek permanent affordability. And I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about why I think that's a wise policy, a wise fiscal policy for the state. And briefly across the top of the slide, you can see the three headlines: protects assets the state invests in, it protects mixed income communities, and it protects Vermonters. And a brief story: Copley Hospital built affordable housing with HUD support early 1980s. They have workforce problems like every medical provider. And they thought quite a bit about converting this elderly development into housing for their workforce and for traveling nurses. And then the question arose, what was going to happen to the 38 elderly residents, some of whom had been there 3 decades, and could they find other housing in Lamoille County? And instead, they worked with us, and we did a buyout and transferred it to a nonprofit so that those folks would not be displaced from their long-term homes. The middle picture is of the most mixed income and one of the most dense neighborhoods in the state. It's where the old Catholic diocese is in Burlington. Burlington has a policy called inclusionary zoning, and that requires, depending on where you are, up to a quarter of the housing to be affordable to people at various income levels, depending on whether you're a renter or homeowner. That's given us the opportunity through the Champlain Housing Trust and the Cathedral Square Corporation to build 2 buildings already there for people of modest means, and 2 more, one a rental building and another a condo development. Should begin one this summer and the other probably late fall. The neighborhood is so mixed that just down the road from one of the buildings we've built, SD Ireland is building condominiums with great views of the lake that sell for well over $1 million. Most federal policy says keep it affordable for 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 years, and then you can cash out. That's usually how people make money in real estate. If you allow that to happen, what would happen down the road is that this would not be a mixed income community. It would be what I would call an economically gated community. And the people who have housing there today, if you are renting to people at $1,000 a month, and the market would let you rent for $2,800 a month, and your motive is to make as much money as possible, those people would lose access to that. When we talk about protecting the state's assets or investments and the power of that over time, years and years ago, and a big motivation to create the Housing and Conservation Board was to save a place called Northgate Apartments. It's the biggest rental complex in the state, 336 apartments. It took $2.9 million to do a $20 million purchase and renovation in 1990. This was the Reagan era that we worked on this deal. Jack Kemp believed in empowerment. We created a nonprofit. And today, the majority of the board are residents who live at Northgate. It's a mixed income neighborhood. If it was time limited rather than permanently affordable, and it's been going for 35 years, and we needed to replace Northgate with 336 other apartments. At today's costs, we need to find $180 million, and probably a third of that as a deep subsidy to make a deal happen. So $2.9 million invested 35 years ago has created 35 years of affordability, and will continue to create more years of affordability and avoid the cost of having to replace that house as an affordable housing community. Conservation, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, though I'll talk for a moment about flood resilience, but here's the work over the last 5 years. But long ago, one of our very early projects, the town of Dover, came to us, I think in 88 or 89, and we did a 1,300-acre conservation project with them. It took 10 years to negotiate with Morrisville Water and Light, but in about 1999, we conserved and turned Green River Reservoir into a state park with the state. And I think that was if you have never been there, there's no better place, I think, to spend the summer's day. Largest body of water from which you do not see buildings anywhere in Vermont. So a great place to go paddle or fish. In terms of rural economic development, our farm and forest viability program works with businesses on the ground, doing business planning, technical assistance, transfer planning. And one of the things, Representative Sibilia, you were involved in was the creation of the MTAP program a year or two ago. It builds on and has become a funder of our rural economic development initiative, which all over the state. I mentioned this because some of you represent small communities. We provide grant writing support in small towns and for small businesses in those towns to seek grants of all kinds. And so far, we have yielded more than $19 million of grants, having spent $1 million on the applications. And we work in the areas of farm businesses, food businesses, forestry businesses, recreation businesses, and sometimes community infrastructure. MTAP is bigger than we are, but it's been a great success, and hope the legislature will continue to support. Obviously, the mission of this committee overlaps with our environmental problems and challenges. Red Clover Commons was built by the high school in Brattleboro after Tropical Storm Irene ravaged the public housing development that had flooded 4 times in 10 years, Irene being the worst, and most of that housing has now been decommissioned. Last year, we worked with the town of Brattleboro, who bought 14 acres from Sir Sosimo Lumber, and they removed a berm and created a little park. But this is going to give the whetstone a place to go, and according to Secretary Moore, greatly reduce flooding risk in the Brattleboro area and downstream. A different story that you might have heard about on Marketplace is the picture on the left of Water Street in Northfield. And after Irene, there were 7 homeowners who chose to do the buyout. We supported those buyouts because the buyout program nationally only gives you 80% of your pre-flood value, and we provided the other 20%. When the flooding happened again in 23, there was some debris on this park. It was cleaned up in 2 or 3 days. The general area is in better shape. But I mention these because I think there's obviously a connection between the work you're doing on energy efficiency and the issues embedded in 181 around code compliance and enforcement with the work we need to do to build better housing. The building in Barry is one that we hope will begin construction this fall after the north end of Barry got hit so badly. Energy equity, as I said, is a major issue for us because the cost of what we do has become so expensive, and the cost, we do require very high standards. We expect people to meet the standards. The incentive structure, however, only lets the organizations that provide those incentives support things above code. I think we need to rethink that a little bit in an era where the cost has gone up so much, because really those incentives could come in a $500,000 home, almost a rounding error. And we want to continue to encourage that. I think without more support, you're going to continue to see a lot of pushback about what should happen. A word about the pictures here. You can walk over to the transit center here in Montpelier. This is a building built after the flooding of a decade ago, and it was built to new flood standards and was not hurt at all in the 23 floods when Montpelier was devastated so badly, and just beautiful apartments. The building above is an infill project in the Whistle Stop mobile home park in Bradford. We did about 25 of these all over the state. We did a lot of work both with the High Meadows Fund and the EIC, beginning with Irene to create Vermont and to experiment with net zero modular housing. As I said a moment ago, we love downtowns. The building above Aubuchon's here in Montpelier had been vacant since the 1970s. From an energy perspective, people have a 3-minute walk to Shaw's, a 5-minute walk to the library, a 10-minute walk if they want to lobby you folks. You don't need the car to live above there. But from an energy perspective, what happened when those buildings, those apartments, which had been vacant for 75 years, got filled, is Aubuchon's found its heating bill went down by half because they were fundamentally heating the atmosphere. There was nothing in the way of insulation. This building, by the way, our lead paint staff went in to check it out before we began construction, and it gave us the highest reading of lead contamination that our machine could measure. It was just that bad. Brattleboro Food Co-op, again, going to rural economic development. Brattleboro Co-op decided they wanted to stay downtown. They were in a strip mall against the river. They restored the streetscape, and they partnered with a local housing nonprofit to build 28 apartments above. In terms of workforce housing, 3 of the folks who moved in the building open actually were employed by the co-op. And one of the things they did here that was really cool is they used the excess heat from the refrigeration system to heat the hot water in the buildings. So again, we're always thinking about efficiency in our buildings. This is the chief result and another winner of that Better Building by Design Award of a mobile home park replaced in Waltham, Vermont by Vermont's. And I visited there last summer, about 8 years after we opened the park with Senator Sanders. And he sat down with a number of the residents and they're very happy with the product. On the right is a newer product. And again, credit to Peter Schneider at DEIC. This product comes out of New York and it's what's called a zero energy ready mobile home rather than a modular home, meaning it arrives on a chassis. And we just installed 7 of them in a mobile home park in Bennington. There are 19 slated to go to a park in Brattleboro this summer, where we're moving people again out of the way of the Whetstone Brook, where they did flood again last in 23. And we're doing high levels of energy design with our farm worker housing program as well. Craig, I don't know if you know what the manufacturer was in this one. This was a Huntington.
Both KBS and Huntington.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Haley.
Thank you. How much for the cost on each one of these? Approximately?
I believe, and Craig, interrupt if I get it wrong, it's around 110.
Wow.
That does not include site work, and I don't think that includes solar.
Yeah. About 150 all in with solar,
On both
with
of them?
zero energy ready.
The one on the right.
The one on the right, the one on the left would be a little more because it's double wide probably.
Rep Sabili?
Where are those being manufactured, Gus?
Plant in New York.
The zero energy ready home standard is a manufactured home standard that comes out of the industry, which is 2 of the suppliers we're using. Titan Homes, which is out of Sandersfield, New York, has been delivering to the state, as well as Clayton Homes out of Pennsylvania. There are really no manufactured homes on chassis in New England anymore. The homes that are built in New England are KBS and also in East Montpelier, KBS out of Maine. And those are called modular homes, so they're moved around on a crane or on their own platform.
I see.
That-
So the difference is what they're sitting on.
Correct.
Got it.
And the benefit to the manufactured home approach is it's more cost effective because you're building it on a line. It's not modular homes are still built more stick built. There is a benefit to building a modular home in a factory, but it's even more of a benefit to build like a chassis.
So that you're building on a line.
Yes, on the right.
And what's the square footage on the right one?
Um,
This is,
That's a sample unit, actually.
Oh.
You can picture You
Okay,
can picture it twice that size, it looks like a mobile home.
okay,
But
that's
they have
what you're
different
putting in.
trim packages, but they can be quite handsome. Depending on the trim package, but they look like a mobile home.
Okay,
So the standard home, I think, is about 14 by 70, so
Yes,
a little over 900 square feet.
okay.
and also double wides. They can be twice that size.
Cool.
Rep Torrey?
I'm just curious if people are using that as an ADU.
Can be,
You can get like a,
yes,
And an ADU is,
we learned that yesterday, accessory dwelling unit.
yes.
and see how quickly I forgot.
I know, we learn a lot.
We learn a lot in this community, yes, we do.
ADU is a big issue nationally. Just got Gus, he talked about it a little bit. It's a big, a lot of states are looking at ADU legislation to try to advance that for, land use policy.
Yeah.
It was a big deal in Burlington recently.
Do you do anything with SIP building?
Yes,
You do.
yes, we do. Most of our multifamily construction is some kind of panelized. And that is also to control quality, and it's more cost effective.
There any companies in Vermont that are doing that?
Yes.
Or if there are,
Yes, I mean, that we're a little bit tied up right now with all the uncertainty around BABA, Build America, Buy America, now the tariffs, because as you probably know, a lot of the softwood lumber as well as the panels do come out of Canada, but there are domestic manufacturers.
gotta get more.
Most of our panels, I believe, do come out of New York State, but when we are buying them domestically. But there are some, and there is a panel, there's one in Vermont, I believe. I don't know that they build for multifamily, more residential.
So here's where I'll get to 181 and try to again be succinct. We support extending the working group extension. We do believe that we need to begin to attribute energy savings to code compliance. And we want to see the department establish a procedure for attributing energy savings to building code compliance. We are very concerned that we do require the builders and developers we work with to meet code, and there's a fair amount of oversight. But without enforcement, we just don't know. And I think that's one of the outstanding issues from this work that I understand there is not yet a desire in state government to actually do compliance, but we think that it's the fair thing and it's the right thing, and it'll help us be able to count the results for getting better. And we think the idea of tracking and reporting greenhouse gas reductions is a good thing for the state. So I'm happy to try to address other issues or answer more questions about the Housing and Conservation Board and the work they're doing. Thank you.
Rep Southworth and then Rep Sevilla.
Any projects in the Northeast Kingdom that you can think of?
Yeah, right now we are doing a fair amount of work in Newport. You're probably familiar with the New Avenue building in downtown Johnsburg. And the conversion of the jail and the creation of the shelter last year. But Rural Ed has gotten the broken ground to up at the old Sacred Heart complex to do the first phase, which is going to be rental, and the second phase in the school is actually going to be 24 condominiums. So that's underway. You probably have also read it. Greensboro is having a discussion about what to do with the town hall, but we hope that there'll be some housing built there as well.
And all of these are designed net zero, or?
No, they're not designed net zero, but they're moving toward the building envelopes. The building envelopes are tight enough that that they're meeting the air infiltration standards that are embedded in net zero, but they're not all quite getting to that standard. And again, there's a lot of discussion among housing providers and among housing policymakers about, given where costs have gone, how far can we go? How far should we push people? It is probably, when we're in natural gas territory, developers still tell us that it's more cost effective for them, may not be better for the environment to use natural gas. over an all electric building. So that's part of why I think if where we want to go is closer and closer to net zero and all electric buildings, what I'm saying to you as a housing funder is because you all want more housing, we need the energy sector that's providing incentives to be able to provide a little bit more robust incentives than have been true in recent years. And it declined as a percentage of overall project development, both because the codes keep getting stronger and because the costs keep going up. So they become a much smaller percentage of the funding stack that's available.
Rep. Sabili?
Yes. So Gus, this.
Yeah.
Looks like, the way out of the crunch that we're in, at least in the short term, because of the cost and, the speed. What percentage of your projects do you envision will be more of these in the next 5 to 10 years? Are you all moving in this direction?
We did that because there was a great opportunity. The park was fundamentally just about abandoned. It wasn't abandoned for legal purposes. I don't think anybody's been able to get a new park permitted or tried to get a new park permitted in Vermont since the 1980s. There was one in Royal County. I think that Ken Harvey did that in the early 80s. So getting parks permitted has not been at the top of the list of things that people want to do. Having said that, one of the things we've done since the pandemic has been to do 27 infill units in parks as a way to get stuff done quickly. And the governor took a note from that and found some other money and has got an initiative going right now around the state, more focused on home ownership than on rental, which I think we actually advised that moving to home ownership rather than solving the homeless problem in mobile home parks was the right way to go, because those communities already have a home ownership ethic to them. I think there's probably going to be more opportunity, but I think there's also a need. I think we need everything. It's a short answer that we need to continue to do the downtown buildings. We need to continue to do infill sites. If this was just a housing presentation only, I'd be showing you 10 new neighborhoods around the state that include Morrisville with a developer named Brand Mink and the St. Albans TIF districts. I think we still want to support our town and village centers, both the old vacant historic structures and the infills around them as well. So I think we need to do a lot of different things. I don't think this will be the only answer, but it should be a growing part of the answer.
I would agree with you. But in terms of ease and cost, this has to be pretty high up there. Would you not agree?
Well,
outside of the no parks.
If it was easy, people would be doing it. There's a reason.
And is it the parks?
What?
Is it no parks? Is that the
establishing a mobile home park? Nobody has tried to do since that I know of, since Ken Harvey tried to do it a long time ago. So you need land, you need infrastructure. If you're asking me what's the most important thing that could happen for housing, it would be for the state to really invest in a big way in rural communities in infrastructure, in water and sewer.
You don't say.
But so if you want, when you use the word ease, permitting a public water drinking system, at least as I understand it from developers, and being then regulated for a small system is a big deal and not easy. So it's much easier when you can hook up to public infrastructure than it is. So cost, yes, that's much less expensive. Ease, maybe not so much.
Okay. All right.
Rep. Campbell, up above us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Gus. Perfect presentation as always. One thing I wanted to mention is I'm sure you're aware of RK Miles building their own version of a Home Depot in the mall in St. Johnsbury, which will free up pretty primo land in right off of downtown in St. Johnsbury. If you're not aware, I just wanted to make you aware.
Is it?
Yeah.
Little pitch, are we pitching? I get
Um,
Please
Yeah.
make our phones ring. And say, we need you to look at your friends in the appropriations.
Yeah.
But
Victoria?
I wanted to ask a question also.
Oh.
Having to do, not only pitch that, but I wanted to ask a question having to do with, well, sort of coming off of Enrique Bueno's presentation yesterday, in which he said that Massachusetts and maybe another state, but I believe Massachusetts, several cities in Massachusetts have adopted passive house as the energy standard for medium to large size apartment buildings. I think it was 12,000 square feet was the threshold. And I just wondered your thoughts on that idea as a way of getting more long-term affordable buildings built.
I guess I'm going to answer that by saying, given the current cost crunch, well, first, I understand that's being done at the local level. Maybe it's being done at the state level too. And I would just say to you, most housing developers do not want the codes to vary from town to town. That just would be chaos for them.
Right.
To have a different code everywhere they want.
Sure.
Second thing I just want to say is this building that I put back up on the screen was the first multifamily building, at least in northern New England, to achieve passive house certification. We're not opposed to people wanting to do that, but I don't think that that's the only standard necessary to use. I think we're pretty close in most of the buildings we use, and I think without more financial support, it just stretches our resources, and so I'm not sure that it's the right goal, but I don't know if that certification and paying for that certification, you would find a claim from the housing development community. In fact, I think you probably would not. And again, I think it goes back to the question of, first, I think let's figure out how, which is why the working group ought to be extended, how to enforce the codes you already have. We do, I think, a pretty good job of asking our developers and builders to do that, but I don't know that we know that that's happening uniformly across the state.
Well, one thing I'll say as well, and Scott's aware of this because Scott and I worked closely for a long time. To Representative Southwick's question on, is it meeting net zero? One of the things in the state right now that DPS and you folks, quite frankly, need to decide is what defines a net zero building. That is not, there's no answer to that question right now. There's different opinions on what a net zero capable building even is. Passive house is one standard. So that's sort of something that needs to be dealt with by the department and by our government, how we define a net zero building. And the second thing is the passive house. One of the pushbacks from developers, it's got a very high certification cost. I'm a passive house consultant myself, so I'm very familiar with the standard. It is an excellent standard, but it's one standard. My entire job is pushing the envelope, no pun intended, to make our buildings is, pretty solid as far as energy performance goes. But Enrique has very strong opinions, and you heard from Enrique, and I know Enrique well because he beats me up every time he sees me.
Rep. Southworth?
What do you think the difference in cost is, just a guess, on from what you meet with your buildings to what passive house is? What's that difference?
It's really hard to put a number on it just because, well, like Gus alluded to, we already meet the air sealing requirement. There would be some additional insulation package, probably a slightly more robust window package. We're very close to it. And quite frankly, TIAS, the North American entity, they keep modifying their standards. And in the Massachusetts and South, it is easier to meet their standard because they're in a different climate zone than we are. We're in a different climates. So passive house is very climate zone sensitive about how you build. So it's hard to put,
Rep. Clifford?
10,000 unit, maybe somewhere around there.
Enrique did not have any trouble putting that number on it. He said 2.7%.
Yeah, is that what he put on it?
Which he said came from Efficiency Vermont's R&D project
Yeah.
from last year.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if VHCB could be a partner to rural communities that face the closure of a school in reimagining the possibilities for housing.
Well, what I can tell you is, I'd be happy, because it's one of my favorite buildings in the state, to show you the Waterbury Seminary, which was the school, in Waterbury Center for many years. And there's 16 beautiful apartments there. I used to drag my kids to ribbon cuttings, and they asked me, well, where do you want to end up? And when you can't live in your nice house, you say the second floor of the seminary building, because that's where the gym was. And so the ceilings are 16 feet high and the windows are big and they look out over this nice little lily field. We've done probably 15 different schools over the years. There's one in St. Albans. The old senior center here in Montpelier was a Catholic school. We just did one in Rutland. That was an old Catholic school. I think a couple of years ago that the community turned out for. So people love seeing the old. It's great when we open an old school as the housing goes on. And sometimes conflicts with historic preservation, because once you're 50 years old, as far as they're concerned, it's historic. But we're happy to work with communities and do more of that.
Great.
And just to tweak, just to follow up what the 2.7. So I said 10,000 on 400,000 in hard costs. So that's close. So, and the problem is a 30 unit building, you're talking about close to $300,000 on the 6, 7, 8, a very expensive hard cost structure. And the thing is, it doesn't sound a lot from a percentage basis, but these developers we work with, it's like amazing how difficult it is to close these projects.
Yeah.
And to get over the finish line. And sadly, there's no other place to cut. The first place, and we've held the line on energy efficiency because, the developers will come to us and say, we can't put in cheaper cabinets. We have to put in decent cabinets. We have to put in flooring that's going to last. And every single component of the building is vetted for quality versus cost effectiveness so that you get the right balance. We don't put in granite countertops or fancy things, but we need things to last. So that has really been, so that 300,000 say is not, it sounds percentage wise like a small amount of money, but to get a project closed, it's actually a lot of money a lot of times. But like I said, I think it's a conversation we're in right now about where we're going. And it totally pairs with this working group and that is being discussed here going forward, because both Scott and I are on that working group, and sort of where we go with codes and where we end up and how we're going to support the codes. I also think like what Gus had said and what was in the questions about energy efficiency's role going forward is really critical, that they were able to stay in the game as their delta gets smaller and smaller between how they operate, funding only above code. So that's going to need to be dealt with as well with their contract with the department, I think, and how they're structured going forward, because we'd really like to keep them as a partner, both financially and technically.
Yes. Any additional questions? Yeah, Ricky.
Yeah, so on this one here.
Yep.
Are those two separate units attached or
Yes.
they built this
Yeah.
way?
Yeah, no, the design was made for that part, but they're built as two units that have a common wall, and they're offset a little bit, so they're not completely back to back.
And snow load, what kind of roof?
Full snow load.
No
There's
issues.
no issues at all.
Good. And the
We
sound
park a
between the
truck on
two.
top of those.
What I can tell you is when I visited there with our now senior senator, the residents we talked to were very complimentary of the quality of the homes. That there are people who can live well with neighbors and sound cancer, and there are people who cannot.
Right.
We had a renter, because we did some infill in a park in Hardwick, and we had a renter who moved out of an apartment and into the park, and she thrived in the park because she wasn't interacting with her neighbors quite as much. Yeah, as much as she had been before.
One other, oh, go on, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say to Representative Sebelius pointing that out originally and regarding that project and your question about the ZERH units, we are gonna be putting 20 of those in Tri-Park. Gus didn't mention Tri-Park.
In
That's
Brattleboro?
He did mention.
Oh, you did mention
Brattleboro. I
Tri-Park?
thought
Yeah.
it was Tri-Park.
I missed that.
I didn't say tri-park,
Oh,
but yes,
okay.
I said that 19 or 20 are going to gravel.
Okay, you did say that. Okay, that's gonna be probably the biggest single placement of the ZERH units that are gonna be all electric. That we're looking forward to. We're in the process of figuring that out right now. Closes the seal.
Yes.
That's been a challenging project to get done
I know.
and figured out. But that's what we're here for.
Yeah, Rep. Torrey?
This picture also makes me think about thermal energy networks. Have you guys started to do any projects that are using,
Geothermal,
yeah, ground source?
there has
Yes.
been, there are a couple,
We're doing
three.
several right now. Alice Hallway in Putney, Reed Commons in St. Albans. We're just starting to do more geothermal, and people, that's another thing that isn't, unfortunately, Vermont policymakers like yourself, I don't think can fix that problem. But the national subsidy right now for geothermal is one of the greatest policy decisions we have at the federal level. That's probably going to go away with all the other chaos.
Oh, it's not.
Oh, it's not?
Not yet.
I hope so. I hope it doesn't.
It's not
because
included in,
Because a lot of people would like to do more geothermal, but it's got a huge upfront cost. The upfront cost is very high. But it's great long-term because of.
how many units in these two properties?
Putney is 25 and St. Albans is 33.
Is that geothermal, available to, people who don't qualify for the AMI delegation, the federal, geothermal? Is there
Oh, is it got a red?
assistance to people,
I don't
that
know.
don't have, income
Yes.
in the range?
You sure, Gus, do you know?
Is there an income limit to getting the geothermal in your?
My guess is that it is not, but you can check with some experts and find out
Like,
and get back to you.
what happened to the?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's one that, it's an energy benefit as opposed to an affordable housing benefit, so I'd be surprised if there's an income test too.
I realize what I was thinking of is they haven't targeted, utility scale geothermal.
Mhm,
That was excluded, but
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know about
mhm.
this kind of stuff.
Where in Brattleboro is Tri-Park?
It's actually in West
West
Brattleboro.
Brattleboro. Right up Route 9.
Chelsea Royal
Yeah, West
before that.
Brattleboro.
Thank you.
Right before you go up that rise, when you're leaving West Brattleboro and you're getting that elevation gain, it's that big, huge series. It's literally used to be 3 parks, so it's a big complex on the right.
Well,
Okay.
thank you for all
Thank
your
you so
attention.
much
and
for
your
being
questions
here.
On a Friday afternoon with the windows open, the jackets off.
From the fire trucks pulling in.
And the fire trucks, yeah, we're the
Sorry.
curious committee. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Okay,
Yes,
All right.
thank you all.
have a good
Thank you.
weekend.
Yeah,
Yeah.
folks, we can go offline and we're done.